Hello, I'm Mandy Haggith. I live in Achmelvig, and I know some of you and not all of you. I'm a writer and a tree hugger. I've been doing both for a very long time. And my most recent book is this one, The Lost Elms. What I'm going to do is start off a presentation that, as Andy says, has got three parts. I'll go first. Chris Puddephatt, photographer, will go after me, and then Romany Garnett will finish off. And between the three of us, we'll cover, hopefully, enough of the different aspects of this arms and legs grown project to give you a good sense of what is involved in it and what's been going on. And also, you'll notice that we've got beautiful sculptures made of elm, made by Chris, who's here as well, so hopefully we might hear about that. And then there are other people in the room. Ian has been involved in it as well from the very beginning, who's got things to chip in, so hopefully it'll be a good discussion that everybody can get involved in. So I never like to assume that everybody knows how to recognise an elm, because in many parts of the world, elms have been decimated over the course of the last several decades, and in many places where there used to be lots of mature elms, there haven't been any mature elms for maybe as much as 50 years. So a lot of people have maybe not encountered them and don't know how to recognise them, and many of you of course may well, but I don't like to skip over this one just in case. The picture on the left is my favourite elm painting, which is by John Constable, who painted lots of amazing elm pictures, and that shows beautifully the kind of bark that you'd see in a lot of elms. The picture on the right is one of those lovely botanical renderings of wych elm in particular, which is the only native British elm, although there are lots of other elms. There's lots of debates about how many species of elms there are found in the UK, and there are lots of hybrids, and there's lots of debate about how you distinguish one species from another. We don't need to worry about that up here. The native British elm is wych elm, Ulmus glabra, and it's the only one, as far as I'm aware, that we have here in this parish. And they're very distinctively easy to recognise. The leaves have got that asymmetrical structure, that they're bigger on one side than the other side. This time of year, the buds are these little chocolate drops, alternate up the stem, and very often you can see there's usually about 6 or 7 on one twig, and the twigs branch usually at about a right angle. They're very, very early into flower. They come into flower as early as the hazel's catkins coming into their yellow blush. So if you see the hazel's yellow, then it's worth looking out for elm flowers, these little pink pom-poms, which then are wind pollinated and generate the seeds at the bottom, which are called samaras. I always say that they're shaped the shape of flying saucers, and the aliens in the middle are the seed. So I got embroiled in writing a book about elms because of this one, which is the Guardian of the Gateway in Beaulieu, at the gateway of the Beaulieu Priory, and it was diagnosed as suffering from Dutch elm disease in 2022, at that point it was the oldest elm tree in Europe. We know exactly how old it was because it was planted by the monks. Beaulieu is called the Vanaken in Gaelic, which means the monks, and they built the priory in the early 1200s, and the diagrams that they drew up for the plot show the avenue of elms that they planted in around about 1202 or 3 or so. And so we know that this is more than 800 years old, and had far outlived the priory, which has been a tumbled ruin for a long time. The rest of the avenue have all died before it. It was the one left standing, and Dutch elm disease took it, and it fell. Actually, but the community were very fond of it, understandably, and they wanted to have a kind of ceremonial goodbye to this tree, and they asked me if I would write something about it. And so I thought I would write this doom and gloom sort of sad poem of loss and senility and all that sort of stuff. And I went and hang out with it, and actually I ended up writing this really quite a upbeat poem in some ways, in the voice of the elm tree. It's called Elm Tree Talks, and it's at the back of the book, which was performed at a community event celebrating this magnificent tree, along with a whole load of artworks, and various other ecologists and various people were involved in it. And lots of people in the community, the primary school got very involved and so forth. It was organised by Isabel McLeish, and this is her etching of that tree. And that got me started. It reminded me, I did a lot of research for the poem, and it reminded me about my own sort of childhood experiences of elms, because I grew up next to an elm wood and they all died while I was a kid in Northumberland. And then I moved to Edinburgh, and then all the Edinburgh trees all died of Dutch elm disease when I was a student there. And it's been gradually working its way north, because the spread of Dutch elm disease is massively impacted by climate change, and we are still, touch wood, are these actually wood? I need to touch a wood sculpture. Touch wood, still Dutch elm disease free up here, because the disease is a fungal disease which is spread by a beetle. And the beetle needs warm conditions to be able to fly and move. It needs minimum 17 degrees. It really prefers it to be like 20 degrees or so for several days. And so we have tended not to have the kind of weather conditions that Scolitis, the elm bark beetle, likes. And so we so far have not been succumbing, our trees have not been succumbing to the disease. So, and we have lots of lovely elm trees here in Assynt. I couldn't write a book. I was on the back of this poem that I wrote, I was commissioned to write the book. And I couldn't just write a book about elm trees. It's about elms globally. It's about the losses to Dutch elm disease, but also about their practical uses, their folklore, the ecology, and also arts and literature around it. So it's a very broad brush kind of book about elms. But I couldn't write the book and stand by waiting for the disease to come up this far and do nothing. And so while I've been involved in doing the research and writing the book, I started to find out about the Assynt elms and encourage other people to get involved in celebrating the fact that we've got them and how wonderful they are. And particular thanks to Ian Evans, who at the very beginning I went to and said, hey, do we know where the elms are here in Assynt? And Ian, of course, being Ian, said, yes, we know where they are. Because, of course, when you write in the Flora of Assynt, the survey notes that he and Pat took recorded almost all of the mature elms that we've got here in Assynt, which was a brilliant start for us to be able to go out and enjoy them. Like I said, the book has got lots to do with folklore and culture and why elms are important and meaningful to us in our culture. One of them is that it has a very, very strong connection with death, and it has done for many, many hundreds of years. And we find them like this lovely one here in Schneedamp in the graveyard. We find them in graveyards in a lot of places. And we also find them a lot near water. They are a tree that doesn't like dry conditions, doesn't like really boggy, acid ground either. So it is picky, and you'll hear more about that later as to where exactly we find them here in Assynt. But a lot of them we do find near water. And that liking for staying moist all the time, and one of the reasons that they do get very badly impacted by climate change is as areas dry up and have much more erratic rainfall, then elm trees can really suffer from that too. They don't like drought. One of the interesting things about elm is that they have very, very waterproof wood. And so there are lots of really interesting applications of elm wood that take advantage of that. So they used a lot for the underwater sections of boats, for example, for sluice gates and groins and things like that, and also, interestingly, for water main pipes. So most of the early water mains that were put in the UK, and also American elm was used for the same thing in America, it was the same in Germany, the same in Holland. The first water mains were actually made out of elm trunks that had been bored out with an organ. And there was, for a long time, so London, Birmingham, Manchester, all the big cities in Britain, their first water mains were made out of elm logs. And apparently, the word boring actually comes from what is involved in trying to actually take out the core of elm logs in order to make pipes out of them, which is what the name implies, a slow and laborious process. But yeah, there's lots of them here in Assynt, absolutely magnificent ones, and I'll not steal Chris's thunder, who took most of these lovely pictures, and he'll show you lots of the elms. What's been great about trying to help get other people to know about the elms in Assynt and celebrate the fact that we've got them still has been the enthusiasm, particularly from the younger generation. And the primary school kids have really taken the elm project to heart and have got really well involved in it. And thanks to Andy for doing some brilliant events with them. One of the things we decided to do was run events that involve both science and the arts, so both play and learning. And that's been a really successful combination. There's a lovely elm in Coolide Woods, this elm on the left, which the primary school children have adopted and called Elmo, and now know huge amounts about it in terms of we've been doing lots of measurements of it and monitoring of the all sorts of lichens and mosses and bryophytes and also insects that are found on it with some astonishing results. We found, is somebody else going to talk about this? Yes, okay, I'll not tell you what the kids find because you'll find out later. It's exciting. And they grow in all sorts of very unlikely and peculiar places. You find them hanging out of crags in the most extraordinary way. They're wonderful. If you haven't started watching out for them and looking out for them, then I really encourage you to get to know them while we've got them. One of the other things that's nice about this project is that lots of different organisations have got involved in it. So we've there are people from the Field Club here, people from the project's been hosted by Coolide Woods. Assynt Foundation have been well involved. We've had funding from a whole range of different organisations. Highland Hanlove have been involved through Andy. And the Royal Botanical Gardens Edinburgh have been a really key player in the project. And this is Max Coleman, who has been working on elms for decades. He's Scotland's wych elm expert. He wrote the wych elm book. And he's been running a project at the Royal Botanic Gardens, breeding from the few rare surviving mature elms that still exist further south, where Dutch elm disease has, and when Dutch elm disease has gone through in a couple of different waves and a tree still stands, that's a pretty special tree. And what Max has been doing is breeding from them. So trying to cross-pollinate between these survivor trees to see if you can generate what he calls potentially resilient elms. And because he's been working with these dying trees for years and years and years, I asked him, why are you not a bitter and twisted old man? That you've been suffering all the loss of these trees for so long. And he said, that's because I've learnt to think like an elm tree. Yeah, come on, tell me how to think like an elm tree. And the secret of it really, he says, is to think very long term and to think at a landscape level. So we, as human beings, tend to think very individualistically and within the sort of time frames of the latest political period and leadership or whatever, or at maximum kind of our own lives. But that beauty elm showed us that elms can live for hundreds and hundreds of years. Elms have actually suffered a massive decline before. There's a thing called the Neolithic elm decline, which in about 5,000 years ago, there were lots of elms. They populated the landscape after the last ice age. There were lots of elms all over the place. And then the people, the paleoecologists who read pollen records, can see that the big population of elms catastrophically collapsed over a short period of time. And the curve that they see of the population of elms follows very much similar pattern to the loss of elms that we've seen as a result of Dutch elm disease. So the belief is that there may have been a human influence, but the likelihood is that there was a disease that wiped elms out previously in the past, and they have bounced back. And if you're a tree that lives for 800 years, then 5,000 years is not that many generations, really. So they have a kind of resilience and a capacity to recover that you know, if you think like an elm tree is quite inspiring. And they don't think individualistically. An elm tree, every year, you saw those samaras, they produce bunches of them on every branch. They produce thousands of seeds every single year. They grow very rapidly, so they're early to flower, early to seed. Those seeds ripen and fall by June. They will germinate that year. They're ready. If you're growing them as seeds, you can plant them out the next springtime. They are ready to flower themselves in their early teens. They're quite kind of like, you know, they get on with it, elm trees. And because they're wind blown, they can scatter themselves across the landscape. And so one tree that lives for 800 years might produce hundreds of thousands of offspring, potentially, to be spread across the landscape. So that kind of thinking, I think, hopefully gives us hope about these trees. They're wind pollinated as well, and one of the interesting things is that an elm won't self-pollinate. And I was completely perplexed about this. Like, how can a little elm flower possibly know what the origin of the pollen is that arrives on it? But these are macro photographs taken by Francois Philippe Gillespie, like using a microscope. And this is an anther with the pollen on it, which is produced by the male part of the flower first. And that pollen is then blown to the female part. And once I'd seen this picture of the female part of an elm flower, I could certainly believe that she would choose, and could be picky and choosy about whose pollen she's going to take on board and use to reproduce. So it's like some sort of sea slug or something. It's an amazing thing she is. And so some of those potentially resilient elms that Max has been growing, we've been planting out in Assynt. We've also been gathering seed from the local trees, growing them at the nursery, and planting them out in the landscape as well. So we're trying to give the elm a helping hand to make sure that they're in the landscape for future generations, lots and lots and lots of elm trees. So if we do get the Dutch elm disease arriving here, hopefully there's already established a next generation to carry on growing. Hopefully we'll have lots of genetic diversity, so that the elms will, at least some of them hopefully will survive the disease if we get it. And meanwhile, let's try not let it come, if we possibly can. So more in time, thank you. And over to Chris.
Thank you. Which is the part?
Oh, sorry, to the right, and left is behind.
Okay, hello folks. So, in the summer of 2023, I got a call from Mandy, and she said, "Do you want to take some pictures of some trees?" I thought, she said, "For a Scooby snack." I'm thinking, "Oh yes, please." So instead, she says, "Get in touch with Ian, and he'll give you a list of the grid references." So I got in touch with Ian, and I got the list of grid references. I looked at the map, and I thought, this is going to take more than one Scooby snack, because there's a lot of walking here, because they're all over the place and they're very remote. But I thought I'd start with one that I already knew, because I had got some pictures of elm trees already, and this one's pretty spectacular. A massive, big, elegant tree by a waterfall with some heather. You know, what more could you want, really? And this is at the Calder Burn, so that's opposite the castle. Not the one that goes to the little waterfall, the other bigger valley that sort of winds its way around. And if you look up into the hills, when it's been raining, you'll see big cascades of water coming down, and that comes down through here. And there is, in fact, a cave just under the waterfall as well, which I went in one day with Richard Pease, looking for elm roots. There wasn't any elm roots, but I did find an elm leaf, so it was a lot of trouble, get really soaking wet. So, a good location, and then what I do like to do is go back to the same places and repeat the process, so to get it through the seasons. And this is it's not quite the same view, but it's ever so similar to the other one, and looks a bit dour in the winter. But you know, the tree itself, the structure of it, does this have a pointer on it? Does anybody know?
No.
Oh, okay. The structure of them they've often, the big ones have got a load of branches down here, and very often then they shoot up and have another, like a secondary canopy at the top. So the shape is pretty distinctive on the ones that are upright, because there's an awful lot that aren't. Anyhow, so I thought there's an easy one. What I'm going to do next is go to the furthest one. So the furthest one is a single tree, and I didn't take the direct route. So for one tree, it cost me 20 kilometres of walking. Oh no, hang on. That's the same one as you've been looking at. Sorry about that. This is the Edward Calder tree, the Calder burn tree, and fabulous community of all sorts of stuff, lichens and ivy, and it's just an immense organism. So there we go. This is the next one, and it's a place called Wolf Glen. Glen and Avati. We're calling it a Wolf Glen rather than a Fox Glen at the moment, because it sounds a little bit more flamboyant, I suppose, than a wolf. But if you ever go up to Inverkirkhaig Falls, and then you go a little bit further, so you can see Fearnloch, and look across Fearnloch, right in the distance, there's a V-shaped gully, and that's it. That's where this thing is. And correct me if I'm wrong here, this is a mafic dike in here, so the geology is different in here, because as Mandy was alluding to, they don't really like to grow on acid ground. Well, it isn't, it's different. And I was plodding away for quite a long time, all on my own, because everyone else had bottled out. And I got to the entrance of Wolf Glen, and funny enough, there's 3 sheep there, and I'm thinking, they shouldn't be there. But then I started to wonder whether they were wolves in sheep's clothing. Clearly didn't work. Anyway, so I walked into this gully, and it really was like going into a film set after all that boggy, boring ground that I'd walked over. The valley opened out into like a V-shaped gully with loads of big rocks which were like as big as a car, and you had to climb over them. But it was like walking into another world. There was trees and stuff and little birds all over the place, and I'd walk through this desert of a bog, and it was just incredible. So it didn't take me long to find the elm tree, which this time is up a crag. And typically these things grow up crags, because although the Dutch elm disease isn't here, the things that are here, there are some sheep, but the main things are the deer, and deer really like to eat them. So very often these are in inaccessible places halfway up the rock face, and they could have been there for ages. And this is a close-up of the same tree, so goodness only knows how you would assess how old that was, or even if it is only one tree, because it's just a tangled mess. And I couldn't really get up there because you have to climb up a rock to do so, but really characterful organism. So I carried on to another place. This is at Edward Calder, which was slipped the tongue earlier. From Ardrett Castle car park, if you cross the road, there's a big double gate, which you can see. It's the driveway up to the Vesties farm. But if you go through the gate and then straight up the bank, at the top of the bank there's an old farmstead, a ruin, and just beyond that there's this little line of rocks with a single elm tree in, and it just really floats my boat, because I love putting things in the landscape so you can see how they grow and what they look at on a daily basis. This is a particularly interesting one because the colour of the trunk is not the colour of an elm tree trunk at all. It's a really very pale green lichen, and it's just coated in stuff. It's really unusual. But the other thing which is characteristic of this particular one is, and you will have seen this on a silhouette that Mandy showed you earlier, it grows horizontally out of the rock and then turns vertically, and there's lots of trees, elm trees, that do this, and it looks to me like it's another mechanism to avoid the deer, because you know it's not normally a way they would grow. So a lot of these have had a strategy that they can do this and get away from the deer. So this is one because it's very accessible. I've been back here a few times because you can just stop at the side of the road, nip up the bank and get another picture. So do like to do this sort of thing and feel the seasons as they pass through. Not exactly from the same place, but near enough. The view's pretty close. So autumn, winter, and then back again for summer, where everything looks completely different, but pretty much the same view and definitely the same tree. Other than doing pictures of whole trees, I do like to do like close-ups, and this is the same tree again. So from where you are above this tree, you can see Iverett Castle pretty clearly. It just frames it, and it's just a bit of playtime for a photographer, isn't it? And I also like looking at the patterns and shapes and textures. This is still the same tree at Edinburgh Calder, and the canopy, no leaves on it, but golden, or sunshine on the golden ground behind it, which was a few feet below, so easy to throw it out of focus, just makes a nice pattern. And that's the same view again with snow on the ground. Floats my boat anyway. Yeah, and I do like wandering about in the snow, I must say, because it makes everything look really atmospheric. Still on the same tree. I will move on soon, honestly, but I do like this one, and it is easy to get to. So there you go. So we'll be looking over towards Trallygill, over that way, really. The castle's down off to the right at the moment. Yeah. So Mandy was saying earlier about the samaras, all the seeds, and they do grow in bunches, like bunches of grapes. There's just stacks of them. I think I possibly took this one just up the Coolag River, just out of the village, because if you stand on the new bridge, as if you're going to Ankala Cafe and look up the river, there's a couple just there, which we'll see in a minute, but also then if you go to the next bridge up, the old bridge, if you're going to Inverkirkake, there's a whole line up the river there, which is easy for me to get hold of, to get pictures of the flowers and seeds and things. They're quite accessible. So,
what time of year would that be, Chris? This one?
Well, leaves on there. The samaras appear before the leaves do, really. So you get flowers, and then the seeds start to appear, and then you've only got buds at that point. So with the flowers out, I'm going to go for middle of May. Yeah. So. Well, this was a grand one. This was a bit of an adventure. I've already taken a picture of the tree here, which you'll never see, but I put this picture first before the photograph of the tree itself, because that's exactly where it was. I was sat having my lunch at the Rock Stop one day, and I realised I was looking. I said, look, that tree I took a picture of, it's over there. And I thought, get the camera out, take another one from here. Put it in perspective. So this is on Glen Cool, and if you're at the Rock Stop and you look inland up the water, that's the view you get. And I think that this is fairly significant, because this is part of where the Moyne Thrust comes out. So in a bit that Romany will talk about later, this is a tree that's been associated with a geological feature for the next part of our project, which I won't spoil Romany's surprises with. So that was the tree, which was on that last slide, right in the distance, and absolutely phenomenal tree, because it's got a waterfall running right through it. It's covered in lichens, loberia, and all sorts of bits and pieces. And it's another different growth habit, because what's happened with this one is that although you can't see it's off the bottom of the picture, it's actually fallen over. So the root plate would really have been over here somewhere, and there's a big trunk across the floor, and then it started to grow vertically again, and this time, instead of choosing to do so because they're trying to escape the deer, because I'm sure they've got the power of conscious thought, this time I think what it did, it just fell over and then started growing vertically again, and we've seen a few of those. They're quite resilient. So a lot of trees would probably fall over and you could expect they would die, but these don't. They just carry on. So you've seen this one already. This is Elmo in the Higgledy-Piggledy path through Coolag Woods. Mandy showed that picture. I think maybe you saw the lichen on the branches on the left somewhere as well. It's a fabulous tree just to stand underneath at any old time, to be honest, because it's easy to get to and it is vertical, and you can just look up into the canopy and get all these patterns, and you can see the branches are not smooth, and it's just festooned with lichen. It's incredible. Yeah, patterns and textures. Same tree. This is Elmo too. You probably know that anyway by now. Whole different situation here, although you will notice this one's horizontal too. So this is a Crag and Spardane, which is on the backside of the John Muir Trust land. So if you go from like Drumbeg up towards Kyle Skew, then you go through a bit of the John Muir Trust land, and this is across the left towards the sea. It's not on Cugnac Mountain, it's across towards the sea, and it's in a fairly inaccessible little gully, but you can kind of see that this is really rainforest, Atlantic temperate rainforest. It just says it all over it. It's full of mosses, lichens, trees, just stuff. It's just absolutely heaving with stuff. I've taken this a long time ago actually, so this is one of the older pictures, but I've been back here and taken another one since, or several actually, and you can see there's different things going on with this, which is pretty typical of what elm trees are capable of. They've got the old stuff laying on the ground, and you can see that's all gnarly and covered in mosses and lichens, all this business, but then it just sprouts out massive new triffid-like shoots, and things like this one, just going vertically, it's this big. It's not just a little shoot, it's a monster, and they just seem to grow really, really vigorously. They're incredible. Okay, so this is back at Inchterdampf. There's a whole load of really, really lovely trees at Inchterdampf, and some of them are vertical, like this classic shape. If you remember, I described to start with that it's like a double canopy. We can see that here. We've got the lump at the bottom, and then it goes up, and then we've got another one on top of it. It's quite a big tree.
Cottage loaf. Looks like a cottage loaf.
Doesn't it? Yeah. Grown on these limestone. Is it dolerite, this rock? But it's a limestone basic rock. And there's a couple of others. There's two to the left of this, and there's another one just there, with a hawthorn, and there's a little one here. But typically for me, in the landscape, love it because I've got Conival in the background, so it kind of just makes the picture sing. And it also means that because it's easy to get to, I can go back and do some more. So this is the same tree taken in the winter. A really lovely day. I was in the winter on more of a challenging day. And then I went back at night and took this one with the moon in it. And this was a challenge because it took me quite a lot of planning to get to have the moon in the right place. And I was planning to have the moon in the sky is an achievement anyway, isn't it? You know, it's raining or something. So I planned this, and I got over there, and it was a bit cloudy. I'm thinking, I'll travel all the way over here from Clashnessie. I've walked miles and miles and miles in the dark, well, about half a mile. I put my tripod down, I'm looking at my clock, thinking it should be up in a few minutes, and it did come up, and the clouds cleared a bit. And by this time, I got a little camping light, or a diffused light, and there's, if you remember, go backwards. Yeah, so there's this stone wall here, and I got my camping light and lodged it in the stone wall and pointed it towards the tree and done a few test shots because I wanted to get some light on the bottom, but I didn't want it just to vanish into the murk. So I got myself set up with this little light and left it on, and then the moon came up, and of course it came up in a different place to what I was expecting, so I had to quickly move all my stuff, and I thought, I'll have this. And I took about 4 shots of this at different exposures because with a camera, it doesn't get what you think you can see. But the camera is just rubbish compared to your eyes and your brain, because you can see stuff like this anyway. Once your eyes get used to it, that's what you get. But with a camera, if you're exposed to the moon and get that right, everything else is black. So, so what you can do is have several exposures, and you can combine them digitally or do something funky like that to try and achieve what it is that a normal human being can see, which is what I did. So I was pretty pleased with the result. Yeah, so you may have seen these before. These are flowers just coming out, and I probably took these up the Kulag River. The detail's quite interesting. I haven't got any micro facilities. I've just taken this with a normal lens. A lot of the photographs I've taken are taken with a Sony camera, and some of them I just took with my iPhone, which in good light is just fine. But these would, well, I suppose they do okay with macro kind of shots, but this would have been with a camera. And then here's the Samaras just developing. That's what I was saying, Martin, earlier, that the Samaras are developing before the leaves have come out. So you can see that the leaves ready to go, but it certainly hasn't happened yet. So that one with all the Samaras on earlier with the leaves would be after this, and they're definitely there first. And some spring growth. This tree is a funny little tree. It's in the War Memorial in Lochimber, so there's quite a short tree with a bit askew with, and it's an elm tree. So I walked through the village some time ago, looking for any other elms. There's quite a few in the village themselves. So I was really surprised to see this was an elm. Now, talking about the provenance of the trees around here, then most of the far-flung trees, of which there are quite a few, then you would expect that they're going to be natural, indigenous, wild-type wych elms. But in the village, this one's probably planted. And I remember seeing a Facebook post from Malcolm Bangor Jones some time ago, and I wish I'd have kept it, but I haven't. But it was a receipt for somebody in the 1800s or thereabouts who bought a load of baby trees, which included a load of elm trees. So it doesn't take brain of Britain to work out that they might well have gone up to Glen Canis, they might well have gone up the Kulag River. So there's a possibility, they must have gone somewhere. There's a possibility that the more accessible trees might not be as wild type as the rest of them in the middle of nowhere. And this one is quite a youngster. I can only imagine it was planted. Back to the patterns and textures again. That's I'm looking down onto Loch Assynt actually. There's one just past the lay-by at the castle, and it just makes a nice backdrop. Another interesting one. This is Trallygill Valley here, and we had a workshop, one of the first events that we did at Inchterdamp, and I got there early because I thought, I'd seen this tree up on the hill and I thought, I bet that's an elm. And I got there early, so I thought I'm going to trudge up there, and this is just behind what I refer to as Cinderella's castle. So you know that turreted thing that's Vesti's place, and it's just behind there. So I trotted up there and it's raining. I was thinking, this is not going to be easy. So I put my back to the rain, and I only really had one way to shoot, because if I'd have turned round, the lens would have got wet and it would have ruined it. So I got this picture, and it turned out just fine. It's really atmospheric, and it's another one of those grown out of the rock, horizontally to start with, before it turns vertically again. And if you're further up Trallygill, that's what it looks like. It's that. So Cinderella's castle sort of down here somewhere, but up the fabulous view, and of course it does help that the snow's there so you can pick it out. But doesn't it look lonely? It's all on its own. We've had a few planting sessions with baby trees. Some of those have come up from the Botanic Gardens, as Mandy was talking about earlier, and I think the last time we put in 160 down at Ledbeg, which they brought up. Some have gone in from tree nursery. In fact, Dave McPhail, the tree planter, he puts in elms that have been grown at the tree nursery on a regular basis. Well, the other thing that some of us have done, a couple of folks in the room have been involved, we've gone to where there are lonely elms and put in another one nearby. And Andy's managed to scrounge some steel mesh to put around to protect against Bambi. This one we haven't gone to, but one of the ones we did definitely do was at Loch Crocack. There's one, maybe two, depends on how you count it up there. So we've been and planted another one up there to hopefully then give it a friend, because as Mandy said, they don't self-pollinate. So the ones that we're trying to protect to grow on, the new ones will hopefully give them a little bit of hope for the future. And this one is all on its own, so it's really got no hope, has it? Okay, so into Lochimber village. This is the graveyard opposite the car park and the garages. There is the back of the pie shop, so it's just the other side of the water. It's a huge big tree, and it's really picturesque. Obviously been there a long time, looking at the state of it. This is the small one I was talking about before, next to the War Memorial. So it's a bit of a scrubby sort of looking thing, but it doesn't understand that when I say it to, so it's not insulted. So, standing on the new bridge in Lochimber, looking to the old bridge, and colours on the right as you look there. So we've got, this one is the start of the show really, but there's also a couple here, and as the road goes up towards Inverkirk, if you follow up, there's a road on the left as well, and there's a road probably 6 or 8 up there, something like that. I'm not very good at counting, so. Same tree in the winter. And then some details. This is the Loberia lichen. I think I probably took this at Crockenyack, which is, if you go up to Glen Canis and then take the right turn at the Walker's Car Park, there's a nice walk up there on the track, and then down into a burn. And it's always good in the winter because you don't get ticks. And that's the same tree, and it's absolutely festooned with lichens and mosses. They're incredible environments for things to grow on them. And I think maybe some of that, and I'm talking out my backside really, is to do with the acidity of the bark is more suitable to a lot of more organisms.
The lack of acidity.
Yeah.
Alkalinity.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm not completely wrong on that. No. Okay. Yeah, we're getting towards the end now, so stay with me. So this is a group along Inchnadanf as you're driving towards the shops. These are on the left, where the water comes pouring out of holes in the cliff opposite the telephone exchange there. And you've got a couple of aspens and a big elm in the middle. And these are really difficult to get next to, so I shot this from a distance, and I always go and look at them from the bottom because you can't reach it, because 6 foot it probably takes me to there, and this is vertical. I'm not a rock climber. And then I go along the top and I get up to here and I look down and I can't get on it from there either. So yeah, this is as good as it gets. But I do go and say hello to all of them. Right. So major pattern here, and this is Mandy's troll tree. So if you ever read Mandy's book, you really should. And I'm not on commission, but it's very good. This is Mandy's troll tree in Inverkirk. And it's a troll tree because if you go and listen to it, the trolls are talking to you, and there's a hole just down here. And there's an underground river down there. I mean, one day I'd like to get in this, but I need a proper bona fide caver to take me in, because I'm not very bendy old man now. Anyhow, getting up close to the same tree, because again it's very accessible. You can go easily, but I mean you do have to climb down some quite slippy rocks actually. And every time I go to this tree, I always come back with ticks. So it's an occupational hazard, isn't it? Grovelling around. There's a lot to see, a lot of character. and that's it from the distance. So you can see this is in the dry river valley at Tradigill. As you go up left there, you eventually get to that little bridge where the water's actually flowing. Opposite Glenbane Cottage, if you walk up that way, you just go a little bit further up towards where the conifer plantation is, and then cut across, and that's where you'll find this thing.
Wow.
That's one tree, and this is another. Okay, so drawing to a close, this is the one Mandy showed you, this in the churchyard at, in the Kirk, Amsterdam, a little church in the kirk in the background. I shot it from the field, and this particular one is shot in infrared, so I've got an adapted camera that shoots in infrared. I just like black and white sometimes. It makes blue sky go almost black. Bit arty. And then I went back there on another occasion just to finish off, and I shot the stars on a long exposure, and that was again more jiggery pokery with several exposures to blend them, and I use that little camping light for the foreground again. But oh, and there's a satellite or something up here, look, which is pretty typical. So I'm guessing that would have been about a 30-second exposure. So you have to set yourself up and have plenty of warm clothes on as a rule. I think that's probably my last slide. I'm just going to press the next one and see, but this could be a surprise. Oh yes, so there you go. So that's me.
So my bit isn't quite as long as that.
Could you go over the other
Yeah,
side? If that's all right.
It's
Great.
a bit
Sorry, was I in the way?
Not to worry, I was looking round and through you.
a bit shorter. So I'll talk about the project that we're on at the moment. So I'm working on the project called the Elm Action Map, and Teams for short, and it's funded by the University of St Andrews, and the Elm project generally has had funding from Scottish Forestry and Woodland Trust, and it's a really nice collaboration, so it's kind of grown arms and legs, and we've been working with all these organisations, and yeah, it's a really nice sort of supportive thing to be doing. So the Elm Action Map, so we were wondering how to take the Elm project further, and we've been doing a few events to raise awareness, and we've got Chris's lovely photos, which is amazing, and we were thinking maybe the next thing to do would be to learn a little bit more about Dutch elm disease and how to protect our elms locally, and also how to celebrate them, because it is one of the last strongholds of where, at least, we didn't know when we started this, but we do now, that there isn't Dutch elm disease here yet, so it's worth celebrating. And so we thought maybe we could make a digital platform on the Coolag Woods website and make an interactive, kind of fun platform where you can kind of move things around, have different pictures, and just explore Assynt's wonderful elm trees. So this is the first page of that, and using Chris's pictures, of course. And so one of the first things we did is that we took a survey to see which stories to include in the elm map on the website. And so we asked people which stories. We gave a little few sentences about each tree, and different people have provided different bits of information, so it's been a really collaborative project, and the clear winner was Elmo at the top. So everybody loves Elmo, and that is definitely the favourite. I don't know if it's to do with the children or what. And then the wolf elm has really captured people's imagination, because it is probably it's a definite sign that wolves were in the landscape, and that's really exciting to go and look at the Gallic, and then all the others listed down below. And because, and then Ardwick Castle was a new suggestion at the bottom, but we decided that we couldn't really include that one because people might want to go and have a look at these trees, and the Ardwick Castle elm is right on the edge of a cliff, and we thought, let's not encourage people to fall off the edge of the cliff, so we're not going to include that one at the bottom, but it was a nice suggestion. Anyway, we decided after looking at them all, because they all got at least one vote, that we would actually just include all of them in the interactive map, and so that's what we're going to do. And so I've been working on this, and I've been fiddling around with it, and I do sort of QGIS digital mapping anyway as part of my other work, and so this is the kind of how it's going to look, and we've got the dots on the map of the different places where the elms are, and then you click on the dot and then up pops a story with Chris's pictures. So that's quite nice. And so we've been putting in the text for that. And it's a nice way to gather the stories of each elm, and some of them focus on the geology, some of them focus on the Gaelic place names, some of them focus on the Atlantic rainforest, and so forth. And you can see roughly where they are. So this is the wolf tree in detail, down in the Vadi. It's a long, long way in, so that's it here, like Chris said. And Ian, I think, provided the information for that one, which is lovely. And there's a few rare plants growing nearby as well, so that's also worth celebrating. And it just, like Mandy and Chris have said, it's just amazing how resilient these elms are, so remote and surviving halfway up a crag all on its own. So it's just incredible, just knowing they're there and surviving like that. So here's another one, Puddephatt. So we've already seen Chris's picture for that one, and that one is up here at the end of there. You can see from the rock stop, and there's a little bit about the geology as well in that story. And what I did was I got all the coordinates for the elms provided by Chris and Ian, and I put them on the map. And this is the provided by British Geology Survey. And you can see that there's a cluster of elms on the blue limestone, the dollar stone there, which is Inchdampf, and then there's a cluster near Lochimber. But it seems like there's a bit of a coincidence that often you see them on the green bits of dike, and those dikes are often base-rich minerals that leach into the ground. So the elms do prefer a more alkaline soil, and so when you put them against the geology, it kind of, you can see that they do cluster around the limestone and the more mineral-rich areas. The purple is nice, which I think is less favourable for them. So that's quite interesting. And we had some people, as part of this, I've been gathering lots of information from different people and different organisations, and part of it, people have been out, because we want to see them elms in the landscape as well, because not everyone who looks at this website will live in Assynt or know about Assynt, so it's quite nice to put them in context. So we had a few people out with drones, and this I think was Ian's step-grandson, is that right? He took this shot, and you can see the trees going up Inchdampf here, and it's obviously autumnal, but it's quite nice to see them in their context of the landscape. So there's a bit about that. And this, I think, if you can bear with me, is a video which John Town, another drone person, has been out flying drones, and so you can see the elms in the context of the wider landscape as well, which will be an interactive feature on the story map. Not sure.
Is that Crag and Sparden, the bottom end?
No, this is Loch Assynt. This
Oh.
is Loch Assynt. I'm not quite sure how that works. Maybe I can just. There we go.
It's Crag Nicoidon.
So this is the drone that was out, and it just puts them in the context.
That's the old path from Amsterdam to Tubek.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's the end of it. Oh, maybe. Whoops. That was my slightly bad video editing, but it gives you an idea of just them in the wider landscape. So part of the funding we've had from the University of St Andrews, we had a workshop at the Rock Stop in the summer, and we had an expert come up from forest research, and we learnt about Dutch elm disease and how it comes about and how to help sort of identify it and look after our trees better. And so these are pictures of wilting Dutch elms, Dutch elm disease, and the kind of signs to look out for. And what we're trying to do is, in the summer, we'll try and do a workshop locally, and we'll share the knowledge that we learned at our workshop so that people can keep an eye out, because we're really keen to be vigilant about the elms up here so that we can protect them better. And so this is just a little bit more about Dutch elm disease, and it's caused by a beetle that only eats elm trees. And the beetle itself is harmless, but it carries a fungus. So when it does its normal beetle thing of eating elm trees, it spreads the fungus under the bark, which then spreads and eventually kills the tree. But it's interesting, the beetle only eats elm trees, so it has to be that particular beetle, and it can only fly, I think, about a mile. And actually that's really good for up here, because the very scattered nature of the elms in Assynt means that might be a good thing for them because they're protected. And if you look at this map, this is another map that I made with the coordinates and the dots. And if you see, these are all the elm trees mapped, and they're quite spread out. And so it's good to have clusters, but then there's a big gap before the next one. And when you talk about wildlife corridors, it's worth thinking about actually maybe not planting elms too close to each other, or putting them in an area and then having a more than a mile gap so that the beetle can't travel too far. So that was quite interesting to learn about. And then just to tell you about the mapping, it was a bit difficult for me. I'd never used this software before, and I usually enter all the coordinates onto a spreadsheet, and I'd upload it onto the mapping, and it just speaks to the software and it maps it. And I did it on this and it didn't work, and so I had to work out how to do it because I hadn't used this. It's a bit more modern, and so what I just experimented, and in the end it seemed like with the normal grid references you get the northings and the eastings, and I had to convert all them into longitude and latitude, and once I'd done that it magically appeared. So I was overjoyed when that happened. So that was very satisfying to get them on the map, and they're not to scale, of course, they're much bigger, just so that we can see them. And that's the wolf tree there, all on its own, isolated, of course. So that's on there, and when you click on this on the interactive map, a little bit of information pops up as well. And this is Joan Webber, who was up in the summer. She spent 3 days in Assynt looking at our elms and stayed in the area. She's like a leading expert in the UK, so we're very lucky to have her. And we didn't know actually when the workshop came whether we had Dutch elm disease or not, because there was a little bit of wilting up at Glencanis on the trees up there, and there was a little bit of wilting elsewhere. And she had a look at them, and she peeled back the bark and examined the trees, and she said that no, that there's no Dutch elm disease in Assynt yet. So that was really exciting for us, and that's her at work doing that. The wilting, we think, was due to root damage at Glencanis because of lots of building work and sort of infrastructure that had disturbed them, and so we think that's why they were wilted, and it was nothing to do with the disease. But it is, we do have to keep vigilant, because as the climate change, the temperatures are rising, and the beetles fly at 17 degrees or over, and I think they are near, I think that Dutch elm disease is near Liverpool at the moment, so it is quite nearby, and it is worth keeping an eye out for signs. And so that's me really at the end. In the future, what can we do? So as part of this project, we're going to launch in the spring an Adopt an Elm scheme, where people can choose a tree that they'd like to keep an eye on, and maybe check it once a month and report back. And we could, anyone who wants to sign up, we can give you a form, and then we'll get back in touch with you, or you can just give us your email. So that would be really great. Also monitoring, it's really good if you're out and about in the landscape. If you could just have a quick check, and so that we know what to look out for, and then any other ideas that you think would be good for the future as this project comes to the end, and this story map will be loaded on the Coolag Woods website. So keep a lookout for that. If there's any other ideas for elm projects in the future, to keep looking after them and making sure that we do what we can to protect them. And I think that's me. Is there any questions? And the other two speakers might want to. Oh.
Before we get on to questions, and I
Yes.
thank the speakers, I think Chris should maybe speak about some of the things we've got here. Just explain them, what we've got here, because these are fabulous. So.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, sorry, I thought you were prepared for this. So yeah, Mandy's talked about the elm, 800-year-old elm tree, the oldest in Europe, oldest British elm in Europe. Came down in 2023 in a storm in January, and Historic Environment Scotland that managed the Priory kind of moved all the wood out of the way to get to their yard, and a little while later offered it out to interested parties. So somewhere else there are other bits of the Beauty Elm. I've been trying to find out who's got hold of these other bits, but no joy so far. But yeah, I picked up 5 random pieces with a sort of vague idea that I would carve something from them that would tell a bit of a story. Just such an old tree, just that different perspective on time and everything it's seen has sort of added a poignancy. The spoon carving that I normally do is coppice wood locally. If it breaks or goes wrong, it doesn't really matter so much, but yeah, there's a certain pressure when you're using wood from an 800-year-old tree, and these are the only bits you've got, so yeah, focus the mind. The story I wanted to tell was how, I believe if we see ourselves as separate from nature and not connected with it, there's a danger that we don't appreciate, how dependent we are, how much a part of nature we are, and then we kind of forget what we have in a home, and if we don't appreciate it and don't kind of cherish it, there's a danger that Mother Nature ends up very distressed by our actions. When we look at the impact that we're having on the world, it can be quite overwhelming. And one of the things that fascinated me was Suzanne Simmons, a Canadian forest researcher. She, in monitoring kind of the movement of nutrients and sap between trees and fungi, coined the term mother trees, and she discovered these big old growth trees were massively connected to all the younger trees within the woodland and were sort of feeding them nutrients. And there was an outbreak of a particular beetle in the Douglas fir forest that she was studying, and she found that the last thing that these big old mother trees did as they died was to give as much of their nutrients to their offspring and the next generation. So yeah, it seemed like there was a lesson there that we can learn from the nature that we are a part of. So, if you happen to know of anyone that's got some other pieces of the Beauty Elm, please do let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. So, is there any questions? Thanks for our speakers. So, to any of the speakers, any questions?
Can I just mention the lichens, Andy?
Oh yeah. Sure.
Stuart Belshaw felled one of the big elms at Glencanis because, as it was said, it was failing, and Gwen and I went up there last week, and it's the first opportunity we've had to get at the lichens in the canopy, because you normally can't reach it, as you see from Chris's photos. So there's just a rough. I mean, the lungworts are extremely common and very visible. It's the biggest British lichen anyway. But this furry stuff, the beardy stuff, further up has been more difficult to get at and get samples. But we're able to do a large number of samples with loppers and saws and things. And today I've sent them off to Brian Coppins, who's the top lichenologist and is confined to barracks at the moment, and said, please send me twigs. So I've sent him a box full of the branches off that particular elm. And I should think there'll be 30 species at least. Well, we've got some from the bark as well, and the main trunk, but mainly from the canopy. So that's going to give us a new dimension as far as the lichens are concerned. There are lists from some of the other ones. Chris's favourite one out of the Calden Morburn, Brian looked at about 10-15 years ago, but again, he couldn't get in the top. So it'll give us a new dimension as far as the lichen flora is concerned.
Thank you. Any questions, anybody?
Just thinking about woodland creation and talking about the distance that the beetle flies, would it then make sense to ensure that we don't kind of plant elms in amongst the gaps and maintain that kind of mile and a half mile?
I think maybe to have them in bunches or in groups, like there's quite a lot at Ledbeg, just there, and then to have a gap, and then you can have other trees, which is fine, but maybe not elm trees, It is worth
Maybe
thinking about.
the geology will dictate that that's going to happen anyway, because they're quite picky. There's loads of places in Assynt that they're just not interested, so probably the geology will help us there.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
as well, I don't know what happened to my slide, but there's one missing, which is the bark beetle traps, which we've also been doing. So we put up these plastic milk cartons, which Andy very kindly did with the children, and they decorated them. They had to cut them all into shape, and we put glycol in them in the summer and hung them on hung them on the wych elm trees, and then we checked them every so often to see what insects are in there. And this is when we didn't know that we still were clear of Dutch elm disease. So we wanted to see if we had the beetle present in the area. And we didn't, luckily, but we did have some really interesting finds. And I put that on my slides, but I'm not sure where it went. So there was a bark beetle found in Coolag Woods, and it wasn't an elm bark beetle, so it was a different bark beetle, so that's fine. And it's the first one seen north of Shieldig in the the Highlands, so it's the first sighting in this area. So that was quite an exciting new find for the records, really. And so that's on the Assynt Field Club website. Ian's written an article about it. So.
And there's a crane fly that I haven't been found since 1911.
Oh yes, that's
yeah.
right. Yes, of course.
We for some reason those traps acquired a huge number of flies. Not quite sure why. They must have just like propylene glycol or whatever, you know, and got high on it. And they've gone off to Devon. I did a sort, and there's a chap who comes up here who does flies. He's a dipterist, and he's taken 150 assorted flies, and he's going to either do them himself or spread them out to experts, because there are a lot of flies in the British Isles, and there aren't many people who specialise in them. So we'll get a lot of fly records in due course.
Yes.
I've got one. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to have to say this, but Glamnavadi does not mean Glen of the Wolf.
Oh, does it not?
What is it? Well, it can mean Devon.
No, it cannot. What does it mean? It's a dog.
Yeah, but who's going to name a remote Glen? Glen of the dog or the fox? I think it's lost the bit that the other bit that goes with it. Yeah. There are some corries along the tops. There are 1 or 2 corriovatis, not many, but they're in the most remote places you can find. So I'm making the opposite case. It's so remote, I think that is a reasonable...
Would wolves have wanted to be so remote?
Well, they would if people are after them. That must have been the last sort of place where they could take refuge.
Wild dog.
No. No.
In the past.
So getting back to elms. I was going to ask, so those distribution you were showing on the maps there with all the elms all very spread out, do you think they're just remnant? I don't know who to address this to, Mandy, or are they remnant elms, or do you think there was lots of elms all over the place, or, you know, can we say that, or will we know? Do you think there was more elms in the past, or are these just wee bits, or maybe because they're on those dikes, there's not that many dikes.
Well,
Do we know anything about that?
There has been research done by Althea from the University of St Andrews, and she has taken pollen records, and I'm hoping to include that in the story map. But there are pollen records of elm, and from a long time ago. She's dubious about it because it's wind blown and whether it's a true representation of what was there, but I think it does indicate that and also because they're wind blown, there must have been more for the really remote ones to have come there in the first place. There must have been more in the past, but yes, it's an interesting question.
I guess how far do the seeds travel? How far do they blow?
Yes.
Miles, I should probably.
Yeah.
She was looking at Iron Age pollen records from Glenmerrick, etc. She did a study there, and they were never very common.
No.
The elm pollen was always very sparse, and other pollen records from down Loch Shoneskeg, etc. It's still sparse.
Right.
So who knows? If you could DNA them, which must be possible, I suppose, the existing ones, although expensive, it would be very interesting to see whether there was any relationships. Like, are the Tralligal ones a cluster of related elms?
and that would find out if they were planted, those ones around Lochaber were
I
planted.
think almost certainly, yes, the Kulag ones, river ones.
Looking at where they grow on these inaccessible crags, I mean, they must have been in lots of other places before the deer and sheep pressure forced them into those restricted locations.
Yeah.
So it must have been more, because if the only ones that are growing now are growing out of crags, there's a reason for that.
It's a bit like the aspen. There's the same situation here. I mean, you know, they don't flower very often, and they're up on crags because they're so susceptible to browsing.
But also the elms do flower very often. I mean, the elms.
The elms do,
the
yes,
elms
they do, yes.
The
But
elms flower
I
a
mean,
lot.
aspens don't. But even so, there's still a lot of them on crags.
But they are absolutely delicious. I mean, they're notoriously, if you give a deer or a sheep or a rabbit or a cow or any of that stuff a bunch of trees to eat, they'll eat the elms first. So they're utterly delicious.
They will
And they were eaten by people as well. I mean, they were used as a famine food, both the leaves and the bark. So yeah.
So I wonder if people cut them down as fodder and actually give
Well,
them.
they're notoriously. They're known in other parts of Europe as the tree of milk and vines, because they were used for growing vines up, and also used as for milk, for fodder, as a winter fodder crop. So they would pollarded, and then this in autumn before late summer they would then be cut, and then the branches dried to be fed to animals, and so very nutritious and used in that way.
Any other questions?
There is one thing we have to
Yes,
say before we go, which is that if any of you have a wood burner, or if any of you know other people who've got a wood burner and are buying a load of good hardwood logs from somewhere else to be brought into Assynt, because elm trees are dying of Dutch elm disease elsewhere in the Highlands, then that wood is making its way into the firewood supply chain. It's not good hardwood firewood. It's notoriously poor firewood, actually. So please don't, if you've got a choice of trees, don't buy elm in from somewhere else, because if it's died of Dutch elm disease, it may well have eggs or grubs in amongst it. And if you do buy it, or if you know other people who bought it, please burn it before the end of March. Just burn it.
Good.
Yes,
good.
thank
And
you,
spread the
Mandy.
word.
Yeah.
We don't want them hatching out in spring.
Right, well, I want to thank you, all the speakers, Romany, Mandy, Chris, and Chris as well. Thank you for a fantastic evening. It's certainly very informative. Just shows you how important elms are and how special they are for all sorts of reasons. So it's opened my eyes, and thank you for coming today.